Let's please welcome back to the stage, Rochelle Ferrara.
Okay. Well, welcome back from the break, everyone. So next, I would like to introduce and recognize a great partner, B. Braun, for the generous partnership of this keynote session that we're about to enjoy this morning. And B. Braun, we appreciate all your support, and we thank you for this. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Jennifer O'Reilly, Regional Manager for B. Braun Medical, who is on the Outpatient Care Unit. Jennifer, please welcome me to the stage, and again, thank you for all your support and your partnership over the years.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer O'Reilly, PWH board member and region manager for B. Braun Medical, and I'm honored to be here this morning to introduce the final speaker for our first inaugural PWH Leadership Summit. Our speaker, who I'm proud to say is sponsored by B. Braun, is not only one with a message we can all benefit from, which is resiliency and change, but she's also a best-selling author and founder of the Coaching and Positive Psychology Institute. Valorie has served clients in 40 states, 10 countries, and written 12 books on personal development, including Successful Women Think Differently, What's Really Holding You Back, and her latest, Successful Women Speak Differently. She's a frequent guest expert on The Today Show, CNN, Dr. Oz, Oprah Magazine, NPR, Essence, and many others. She's spoken for hundreds of organizations, including GE, McDonald's Corporation, Verizon, Coca-Cola, and the United States military. Ms. Burton has a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in journalism from Florida A&M University, and a BA from Florida State University. PWH also invites you to join over 41,000 subscribers to her inspiring weekly e-newsletter. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ms. Valorie Burton.
Strawberry champagne on us. Lucky for you, that's what I like. That's what I like.
Good morning.
Lucky for
Good
you,
morning.
that's what I like.
I have heard that y'all are so energetic, so I've been very excited about finally getting to talk to you. But I want to thank PWH for the invitation. Last year, I was speaking in Columbus, Ohio at their Gender Equity Summit, and a few of you were there. Where are those of you who were there? Okay, so there was a handful of you there. And I mean, they found me afterwards like they were not going to let me leave that room. And they said, we have somewhere for you to be next June. So thank you so much for the invitation. I truly appreciate it. And to B. Braun as well. Oh my goodness. Jennifer and her colleague Justine have been amazing hosts. And it was so wonderful to get to spend some time with all of you last night. So thank you for partnering in the sponsorship. So I actually want to start not by me talking, but I'm going to ask you all to talk to each other for just a moment. Okay? When I say just a moment, I mean like 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and then you have to stop talking and let me finish. Okay, do you think we could agree to this? Okay, some of you didn't answer, but I'm gonna just cross my fingers. Okay, so I want you to just say good morning to whoever around you wanna say good morning to, and there are more instructions. Wait, y'all are quick. Okay, and I want you to ask them, over the last week, what's the best thing that's happened to you? The best thing that's happened in the last week. Some of you look like you're thinking way too hard about this. Okay, it's just a fun question, so I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. Best thing that happened to you in the last week, go. What's the best thing that happened to you? I can only imagine. So, like, when you reflect on it, what makes you most excited?
Just the energy level and the impact that's being reported by everybody, that it was worth their coming, that they found change, that can make them better at what they do, make their lives easier.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thinking about my best thing, there's always good stuff happening. I would say a great moment is my husband got my son, he's 4, to swim without his life vest. He swam like about 6 or 7 feet, and he's just so excited.
Oh,
and,
that's awesome.
and you know, it's just fun when you see your kids learning. And I mean, just a month ago, he was crying if we tried to make him get in the pool.
And that excitement in their eyes as
Yeah.
they realize they've accomplished something I can do.
Yeah, now he's just jumping in the pool. So,
that's awesome.
you know, it just feels good as a parent when you see them go from fear to conquering to actually just
Confidence.
having the confidence. Yeah. Well, thank you. I didn't want you out here by yourself. Okay, about 20 more seconds, 20 more seconds. Look at you, oh my goodness. You were serious. Okay, so I started off with that question and I saw the energy go way up. Some of you apparently had a really good week, yes? And that's so awesome. So I asked that question because I think so often we go through life and it's very easy to notice the things that are going wrong. In fact, a lot of times we point them out, we think about them a lot, and we sometimes just ignore the things that go well, even if they're small things. So asking that question really forces us to be grateful, to find what there is to be grateful for. And I start with that question because a lot of what I'm going to share today around resilience comes from this fairly pioneering new field called positive psychology. I promise I did not make up the term positive psychology. I did not make up my degree. Traditional psychology tends to focus on fixing what's wrong with people, the problems that occur, the issues that come up, and that's a really important endeavor, okay? Many of us have issues. Any of you have issues? Only 5 of you have issues? Okay, the rest of y'all really have issues, okay? So that's important, but positive psychology is the study of what happens when things go right with us. What is it that happens when you're happy, when you're productive, when you perform at your highest levels? What occurs when you express gratitude or you savor the moment? And so the really amazing thing about this is when it comes to resilience, positive emotion actually expands your ability to deal with adversity and with stress. It's really a success strategy. It's a resilient strategy. And so we have to be very intentional about it because we live in a world that the negative comes up often, you've probably noticed. And in fact, our brains are built in such a way that we notice the negative. And in fact, as women, this is a really interesting trait that we have, we remember the negative more vividly than men do. So whether they're testing like 3-year-old girls that experience some fear about something or an 80-year-old woman, they find that when we go to repeat a similar experience, women are more likely to remember, that didn't go so well last time. And I see some of the guys in here going, yeah, I've had that experience, right? So the truth of the matter is we have something called negativity bias. Everybody has it. We notice the negative, and we have to be very intentional about balancing that out, because when we're facing obstacles, when we're dealing with a lot of change, whether it's at home or within our organizations, when you don't know what's coming next, being able to be resilient is absolutely essential, because the one thing we know is always going to happen is that things are going to change. And sometimes they change in ways that we really don't like or want or welcome, but it doesn't change the fact that we still have to deal with it. So let me go ahead and get started. If you all want to, I don't know if my button's working. All of a sudden it's going to advance like 8 slides. There we go, okay. I don't think I did that. Did I do that? It's like magic up here. Okay, if you want to connect, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Thank you. He's really working with me here. All right. So what is resilience? What is resilience? Number one, it's the ability to bounce back from setbacks, but it's also our ability to thrive and grow and be effective in the face of adversity, challenges, and change. So I'm going to ask you to just advance when I need you to advance. And maybe you could see if there's a way to fix this so I don't have to keep stopping and telling you to do it. I will leave it right here. Okay. And you can go to the next slide. I'm so sorry, you guys. All right. So here's the thing. Resilient people actually think differently. I mean, in the face of challenges, in the face of opportunities and obstacles, they actually say something different to themselves than the average person. So there's something called psychological capital, right? We all know what financial capital is. Oftentimes we talk about human capital. But really, when you're dealing with change on an organizational level or even within your family, if everybody's not on board, if there's lots of resistance, if there's heightened levels of stress, the resilience of the organization as a whole suffers. And so it's really important to really think about how can we make each person more resilient? It takes slowing down. It takes noticing when there's a win. How did it come about? If two people are going through the same thing and you see one excel and the other languish, what's the difference? And what the research shows us is the difference is in what they say to themselves in the heat of the moment when they're dealing with whatever that change happens to be. So I want you to think about, maybe it's you and someone else, or maybe it's two other women that you've considered in your life that, both of them have very similar talents, similar gifts, similar background and experience. And yet you find one is just far more successful in their endeavors. What is the difference? We often think that it's about knowing the steps. So we're always talking about steps to success, right? Do step 1, then step 2, then step 3. The thing is, we always know, for the most part, what steps to take to be successful. Let's take one of the most common goals, success goals in probably the whole world, but certainly in America. What's one thing that people often set as a goal? Anybody? Losing weight. Thank you. You know exactly what it was. Okay. Is there anybody in here that does not know how to lose weight? Anybody just at a complete loss as to what to do to lose weight? None of you. Okay, so how do you lose weight? Any ideas? Eat less, move more, right? That's pretty much the bottom line. I don't care what book you buy. I don't care what expert you listen to. It's going to be a variation of eat less, and what you eat needs to be healthier. Eat less doesn't mean instead of 3 pieces of cake, eat 1, right? So it needs to be healthier food, and you need to move your body more. So, maybe there's different ways to move your body. Maybe there's different foods you could eat, but those two are the bottom line. So what's the difference between the person that manages to lose the weight and keep it off and the person who just can't seem to do it? Oftentimes, it is in those key moments, right, when you're sitting in front of the food. Or perhaps you don't even have the food in front of you yet, but you're making the decision about what to eat. Can you think about that last time when you were really, you thought, maybe I could have the salad with a little tiny piece of fish on top. But you knew it would not fill you up, right? And you were trying to convince yourself. But in the heat of the moment, it is the thoughts. Because most of the decisions we make in just a few seconds when we decide to pivot in one direction or another. So it's really not the steps. It is having enough discipline and self-control in the heat of the moment to be able to do the right next thing. It's working now? Wow, y'all were quick. Thank you. All right. Yay! That was the key. We did it. All right. So there's 7 things in particular I want to share with you this morning around being able to be more resilient. And as I talk about this, I want you to think about your own life. In what area do you need to be more resilient? It may have to do with your job or your career right now. Maybe there's just some change going on. Maybe there is a promotion that you want. Maybe there are some ideas and things that you want to get across, but it's very challenging for you. Perhaps it's in your personal life, something that you're going through. Perhaps it's in your health or your finances. Really think about where you need to be more resilient in navigating the challenges that you're facing, okay? And so as I'm talking about this, apply what I'm saying directly to your personal situation, whether it's professional or personal. So the first thing we have to do is get really clear about our personal mission. Some people know very clearly what they're here for, and a lot of people ponder the question but never fully answer it. So the 7 things I'm going to share are actually an acronym for purpose. But I have to tell you that purpose really is a compass for everything that you do in your life. And your purpose answers a very simple question. How is someone's life better when they cross paths with you? How is someone's life better when they cross paths with you? You might be that person that just illuminates ideas. You might be the educator. You might be the bridge builder. You might be the person that connects people. You might be the person who just, completely is the best problem solver, right? So whether you're in a work meeting, whether you're working with a customer, whether you are at home or in your community, when you understand what you bring to any given situation or relationship, it makes it clearer about how to proceed, what decisions to make, what opportunities to take advantage of, and which ones to let go because it's really not within your purpose. I was speaking years ago in a town called Saskatoon. How many of y'all are from Minnesota in here? We have a handful. So y'all may know Saskatoon. You've heard of it? Y'all haven't either? Because I had never heard of Saskatoon. We've got one person, right? So like the ladies come up from PWH when I was in Columbus and they're like, come speak in Minneapolis. I'm like, I know Minneapolis. I've been to Minneapolis quite a few times. Come speak in Saskatoon. I had no idea where Saskatoon was. Looked it up on a map. It's about 800 miles north of here. I don't know if y'all knew you could go that far north of Minneapolis. And I went in November, which I do not recommend, okay? And I was speaking to a group, it was about 1,200 women, and there was one woman in the audience who was so enthusiastic. I spoke 3 times that day, and she never lost her enthusiasm. Okay, no pressure on you guys. But she was like nodding her head while I was talking. She was smiling, and after lunch, I'm speaking for the 3rd time, she is still smiling and nodding her head. She's like nudging her girlfriend, going, write that down. This stuff is so good. Write it down, right? And I don't even know if that's actually what she said, but I told myself that's what she said because there were a few people that looked tired and I needed a little confidence boost, right? And so afterwards I was signing books and she came through my line and I said, I remember you. You were about 10 rows back, a little to my right. She said, do you remember where everyone was sitting? And I said, no, I don't. I said, especially the yawners. I don't remember them at all. But I remember you. Is your mission in life just bringing joy to people? And she just had this amazed look on her face. She said, can that be my mission? Because I've been trying to figure it out, and I had no idea. And she wrote me an email the next week, still excited, still enthusiastic. She's like, I went back to work. I told everybody that you said my mission is bringing joy to people. And they all looked at me and said, yeah, we know that. Right? Whatever your mission is, the people who are impacted by it, they already know what it is. So a lot of times when you are unsure, confused, wondering, one of the best things you can do is talk to the people around you. You know, how do you see my impact? How do you think people's lives are different when they cross paths with me? Because oftentimes we take our mission for granted because it's innate. It's what we do just as a part of who we are. And sometimes we take it for granted so much that we think, oh, everybody can do this. You've probably heard people marvel at something that you do, and then you're like, yeah, it's no big deal. And they're like, no, that's really a big deal. So sometimes you really just need to ask other people. But that very important question is, how is someone's life better when they cross paths with you? In your workplace, the question is, how is your organization better? Because you're there. That mission professionally should mirror what your mission is overall. Your mission is not your job. It's the impact you have as a result of the roles that you play professionally and personally. And once you know what that mission is, it becomes a lot easier to get clear about your vision. So that's the first thing I want you to know. Picture your possibilities. If you want to be resilient, it is so important to stay focused on what your vision is. And oftentimes we have a vision and we get to the vision and then we forget to say, okay, so what now, right? So we can find ourselves kind of in a lull. And so it's really important to simply stop and ask, where do I want to be this time next year? Where would I want to be 5 years from now? Sometimes it's as simple as, what do I want to see different a month from now, right? There's a lot of change that we can make in short periods of time, but if we never set the goal, we find ourselves languishing. And this is so important for resilience because when we know that we're reaching towards something, it becomes a lot easier to push through the obstacles to get there. But if we don't have a clear vision for where we're going, our vision really becomes the obstacle. Instead of looking up at the vision, we're looking down at what's right in front of us, at the obstacle that's in front of us, at the frustration that is in front of us. So it's a resilient strategy to say, okay, I know this obstacle is here, but what's the bigger picture? And when you get clear about that bigger picture, oftentimes what pops up, if you're really honest about yourself, about what you want, is this emotion that tends to get us stuck, and that is what? Fear. Fear. There's a few different types of fear, but generally speaking, our fears are what get us stuck. And in order to be resilient, we have to be willing to acknowledge them and to push through them. So there's 4 core fears. I actually talk about them in the book that PWH has bought for all of you. Wasn't that just awesome of them to do? So your most common fear we think of, fear of anybody? Failure, fear of failure, fear that we're going to fail, and that is just the worst possible outcome. And sometimes we're raised really to believe that fear is the worst possible outcome, and therefore we don't set our vision big enough. It's not really authentic to what we want because we're afraid that we can't get to it. What if instead of seeing that fear of failure as a reason to stop, we saw it as a reason simply to be curious? To begin asking those questions. What am I really afraid of about failure? What could I learn from failure? Where did I fail in the past where somehow it worked itself out? I became better as a result of it. If y'all can picture me in combat boots with a rifle, do I look tough? Can y'all picture that? I don't know what's so funny. I don't look tough up here? Well, one of my first big failures in life was my first year of college. I was a cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy. I will never forget getting that presidential appointment in the mail that spring day. I'd walk to the mailbox. I opened up this big envelope. I saw that it said presidential appointment. My dad was stationed in Korea that particular year, and I called him after school, which meant it was like 4 o'clock in the morning when I called. And I remember reading him the letter. Now, I had already decided, even though I had applied to West Point in the Air Force Academy, that I probably didn't want to go, but I knew it was a really huge deal to get in. So I just wanted him to read him the letter, right? And so I had never heard my dad cry. He got so choked up. He was so excited. And I really wanted to say, well, I don't actually want to go. I just thought you might want to know I got in. And so my parents really thought otherwise and convinced me to go, and I got there, and I got my grades the first time, and I know y'all are all so smart, so you probably don't get this, but I had a 1.4. Did y'all know you could get a 1.4? It's really not that hard to do. And it was a rough year. It just seemed like it went downhill from there. I mean, my parents divorced that year. I was in the hospital 3 times. Only time I've ever had surgery in my life. And bigger than anything, I realized it wasn't my passion. It was all I knew. I was born on an Air Force base. My dad's retired Air Force. My mother retired from the Army Air Force Exchange Service. I grew up mostly in Colorado. The Air Force Academy is there. My term paper in 9th grade was on the Air Force Academy, and I decided right then that's where I'm going to school. But I realized it wasn't really my passion or my calling. But by the time I left, I felt dumb. I had lost all my academic confidence, which obviously had been a pretty darn good student to get in. And yet what I realized is this isn't for me. And sometimes when we fail, rather than seeing it as an event, as I failed at something, we internalize it, which becomes I am a failure. 2 very different ways to process failure. I really didn't talk about it for years until I wrote my first book, and I thought, I should talk about failure in the book. And I was like, well, you can't talk about failure without talking about your own failures. But a lot of times what we do with failure is we try to overcompensate for it, and that's what I did. Since I had grown up really always believing I was smart because people said, you're so smart, I had to somehow prove it. So I thought, I can't prove it with my grades anymore, so I'll just rush through college. If I finish early, maybe that means I'm still smart. And that's exactly what I did. I went to 3 colleges in 3 years. I graduated, I was 20, and what do you do when you're trying to overcompensate? The finish line's never enough, so you just push it out a little bit more. So I went to grad school and I finished, and I was 21, and I had just started to enjoy the journey, but I was done. Do you know what you want your kids to do when they finish school? Anybody? Tell us what you really feel. Move out, get a job, right? And that's what I learned in that, is that so often when we're overcompensating for things, we take the joy out of the journey, we also take the lessons out of the journey. So if fear of failure is yours, I want you to just kind of notice the ways in which you might be overcompensating for things, or just not accepting that, hey, I failed. What did I learn from it? How do I simply move on? Sometimes what we really need to practice in order to be resilient is something called self-compassion. There's a lot of research around this idea that when we fail, when we make mistakes, when things aren't going so well, that if we can simply have the kind of compassion for ourselves that we have for the people we care about, right? When someone you care about makes a mistake, you don't just keep beating them up about it. Hopefully you don't, right? You won't be best friends for very long if you do, right? When your best friend is having a difficult time, what are the kinds of things you say to them? How do you encourage them? And then ask yourself, why don't I say those things to me when I'm failing, when I'm having a hard time? So fear of failure is one of the core fears, but the opposite is another, which is fear of success. Fear of success, which a lot of times we don't recognize, but that's the fear of the heightened expectations, because when you succeed, people expect you to keep succeeding at that level. Are y'all with me on this? Have you ever experienced that? And so the heightened expectations, and sometimes that fear of that constant responsibility, right? You're so good at what you do, they just keep giving you more of it, right? And so a lot of times that is the fear that's coming in. Okay, if I do really, really well here, I'm gonna have to keep it up. And that pressure can be an internalized fear that we don't even really notice. So there's fear of failure, fear of success. Then there's fear of rejection and disapproval. This is my core fear. Fear of disapproval, fear of rejection. If you think about what other people are going to think, people who probably don't even think about you very much. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, these are people, some of you have a person in your head. It might be somebody from high school. It might be somebody from your first job, and they were really critical, and you still think about what that person might think. And it ends up guiding your decisions, right? So that fear of disapproval or fear of rejection is huge. And then the last one is fear of losing control. Do we have any control freaks here? Any control freaks? No control freaks? See, that's why I know this is a room full of control freaks, because the real control freaks are not going to tell you that they're a control freak, because they want to control what you know about them. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that fear of losing control is you don't want any uncertainty. You want to know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. Are y'all with me on this? But here's the thing about fear. It is inevitable. When you set that vision that helps to pull you forward, there's going to be some sort of fear. Your fear might be different than the person sitting next to you, but nonetheless, it threatens to stop you. So I want to simply encourage you to know that fear is inevitable. It's not a stop sign. It's a lesson I learned when I was about 11 years old. Like I said, I mostly grew up in Colorado. My grandmother came to visit one year. I used to spend all my summers down south with my grandparents, so we flew from South Carolina to Denver this particular summer. She stayed for several weeks, and one Sunday, we went up to the mountains to Estes Park. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Estes Park. It's just beautiful. And so we go up in the mountains, and we're really high up. We are crossing over the Continental Divide. It's about 14,000 feet above sea level. I remember getting out of the car and actually looking over into a valley, and I was literally blown away, and my breath was taken away. I looked over and I just went, because because I was looking down at the clouds. It was absolutely marvelous. But we got back in the car, and I had a different kind of breathtaking moment a few minutes later. We were driving, and the road started to get really narrow because you're that far up, and then all of a sudden it was basically like one lane, and there were rails, and then there were like no rails, and I was having all kinds of thoughts about, that people just plow through the rails? Did the workers get tired right here? Like, what is going on? And I think my grandmother was thinking the same thing as I looked over in the back seat, and she was digging down in her purse looking for her blood pressure medication, and she started yelling at my dad, "Junior, turn the car around." And my dad's like, "I can't turn the car around. It's too late." And so at this time, I announced that I need to go to the bathroom. So it's just total chaos in the back seat. And my dad's like, "It's Sunday afternoon. We're 14,000 feet up. There are no bathrooms. You're going to have to hold it. It'll be about like 30 minutes. I bet we can get to a bathroom." So I'm like, okay, cross my legs, hope for the best. And we keep driving. And a few minutes later, I see on the side of the road that there's a lodge. Like, there's a big parking lot, and there's a lodge. And I'm thinking, awesome, I bet there's a bathroom over there. We turn into the parking lot. The lodge is closed, but there are about 6 outhouses along the edge of the parking lot. And I'm thinking, I just hit the jackpot, okay? So I hop out of the car, I run over, and I'm so focused, I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm up in the mountains or what might be on the other side of the outhouses, because they were facing away from the parking lot. And so I turn the corner, and there is a moose standing in front of the 6 outhouses. And that moose was looking at me with such interest that I could have sworn that he had this big antlers, and it seemed like he kind of cocked his head a little bit and licked his lips. Like, she looks good, tasty, chocolatey even. And right about then, I decided I did not need to go that bad. I backed up, I ran to the car, I got in. My parents were like, "That was quick." I go, "Yeah, there's a moose over there." And Dad's like, "Oh, okay." He starts to crank up the car, but you got to remember, Grandmama's in the back seat. And she's looking aggravated, like, how dare that moose try to intimidate my grandbaby? And she looks at me and she goes, "Come on here." Now, I don't know if any of you have Southern grandmothers, but let me just explain. When they say, "Come on here," do you know what you do? You come on here. You don't ask questions. So I thought she must know something I don't know. She grabs my hand. We march across the parking lot. We get to the outhouse. We turn the corner. The moose is still standing there, but this time it's Grandmama and the moose, eye to eye. And she looks at the moose with no fear whatsoever, and she says, "Go on now, get." And the moose turned around and walked away. Now, I tell you that story because oftentimes your fear is like that moose. It's going to show up, and you've got to talk back to it. Acknowledge that it's there, but look at it and say, "Go on now, get." Okay? So I'm going to let y'all practice that, okay? I know some of you don't understand Southern dialect, but let me explain. Gone is one syllable, okay? And it's get, and you have to get that hand motion in there with it, okay, because it kind of helps. So I'm going to count to 3 and let y'all practice, and I don't want to hear "go on now," okay, none of that. You got to do it forcefully. Go on now, get. Are y'all ready? Okay, I can't wait to hear this. 1, 2, 3. That's cute. That was good. That was good. That's good. So whatever your fears are, I want you to just notice them, acknowledge them. There's so much power in saying, "I'm afraid. I'm afraid, but I'm going to keep moving forward. The fear is here because I'm outside of my comfort zone. And I should not expect that when I'm out of my comfort zone that I'm going to feel comfortable. Naturally, out of my comfort zone, I'm uncomfortable. It probably means I'm moving in the right direction. Eventually, my comfort zone will expand, and that fear won't feel so intense. Sometimes it never completely goes away, but if you want to get to that vision, you have to make peace with it. That the fear is inevitable, but it's not a stop sign. So here is number 2. I did it. Use your failures and your mistakes as a learning tool. I talked about this whole idea of fear of failure, but here's one of the things that we know from positive psychology research, that you can predict a great deal about a person's ability to be successful by how they explain failure and how they explain success. Psychologists call it explanatory style. I like to call it thinking style because it's just an easier word to use. But you either have an optimistic thinking style or you have a pessimistic thinking style. And this isn't just about being optimistic or pessimistic, but is in the face of a good event or a success, how do you explain it? In the face of a mistake or a failure, how do you explain it? So in the face of failure, those who are most successful tend to explain it in terms of let me back up and start over. All right. In the face of a failure, those who are most successful tend to explain their success in terms of the personal attributes that led to the success. So when they succeed, they acknowledge and they'll say, well, I worked really hard. I do have a gift in this area. So they see it as being personal. When they succeed, they also see it as being pervasive. So when they succeed on one project, they will transfer that to another, and they will say, this is pervasive, meaning it's going to affect everything I do. If I could succeed over here, I could succeed over here too. Think of it in terms of your kids. The kid gets an A on a math test, and they were a little nervous about the English test, and the math test boosts their confidence. They realize, well, I studied a little bit harder, or I got some extra tutoring help, and it made the difference, and I bet I could do the same thing on my English test next week, right? So they see it as personal, they see it as pervasive, but they also see it as being permanent. They don't feel like every time they're going for something that they're just kind of on the edge. I don't know if I'm going to succeed this time. No, they say, well, I did it last time. I can do it again. So they see it as this continuation. But those who have a pessimistic thinking style do just the opposite in the face of their successes. Rather than seeing it as personal, they attribute all the external reasons why they succeeded. It's not personal at all. It might have been a fluke. That was just an easy project or an easy test. It was everybody else that was on the project. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't give others credit, because obviously collaboration is important. But when you don't notice what you contribute, this becomes a problem in terms of your thinking style, right? So they don't see it as personal. They don't see it as pervasive. They see it as an isolated, specific event when they succeed. And they don't see it as permanent. It's temporary. So no matter what they're doing, they always feel like, oh, I don't know if I'll be successful this time. I don't know if I'll be successful this time. So if you find yourself doing that, I want you to just take notice. If you find yourself never giving yourself credit, say, well, what did I contribute here? It's a really important question. I know there were others who contributed to the success, but why did this work because of me, right? And what else could I apply it to? How could I help boost my confidence by noticing what I have done well and believing that I can repeat that in the future? So it's really important to notice your thinking style, but very interestingly, in the face of failure, those with an optimistic thinking style actually do the opposite of what they do in the face of success. So when they fail, they don't say it's personal. They find all the external reasons why the failure happened. Now, here's why this works. Because oftentimes there are external reasons that you have control over. So let's just take the academic setting as an example. Anyone in here ever done poorly on a test? But if you were honest with yourself, you know you waited until the last minute to study. Anybody been in that predicament, right? Anyone ever had a professor that they just couldn't get, like they were just awful, and you can't just tell them they're awful, but you could use a different teacher, right? Anyone ever not eaten breakfast and had a test and been totally distracted because your stomach was growling? Anyone ever had that happen, right? Maybe you've even had that happen in a meeting. You're like, I'm completely distracted right now. So they look at all of those external things because you know what? Is there anything you could do about those things? You might not change professors, but you might get someone else that could explain the material to you better, right? You could certainly start studying a little earlier. You could certainly get more sleep. You could certainly eat breakfast next time. So by looking at the external factors and not saying, I'm just a failure, they're able to look at what they can control. So those who are most successful don't see it as personal. They look at the external reasons. They don't see it as pervasive. When they make a mistake or they fail, they don't suddenly say everything is doomed, right? And they don't see it as permanent. They see it as isolated, and they learn what there is to learn from it so that they can apply it to the next time. But those with a pessimistic thinking style, when they fail, They do the opposite of what they do when they succeed. So when they fail, they say it was personal. It was me. I'm just dumb. I just can't do this. It's pervasive. It's going to affect everything I do, and it's permanent. This situation is going to last forever. Some of you may notice some of this thinking, whether it's in yourself or maybe in others that you know. But if you just begin noticing it, you can be very intentional about changing it. We have to use our failures and our mistakes as a learning tool. So that's the U in purpose. I was supposed to go through all these, but I said them already. Okay, so the R in purpose is simply reach out, reach out. Resilient people don't go it alone. And we live in a very individualistic culture, so it's very easy for us to sometimes feel like, I'm going to get more credit if it's just me, but it's so important for us to collaborate, to reach out, to ask for help. And we know that on teams in particular, so just think about your work environment, for example, that it's important for us to maintain a good ratio of positive to negative interactions. Some of you may have heard about these statistics before, but basically on teams, if the ratio of positive interactions to negative interactions goes below 3-to-1, teams tend to lock up. People don't hear each other. They don't hear each other's ideas, each other's opinions. If you've ever sat in a meeting and somebody says something and you see somebody else over there with their arms crossed, and another person kind of smacks their lips and you're like, what was that? And they go, I was just breathing. It's like, yeah, you breathe really loudly. What is that all about, right? So a lot of times teams get locked up because there's too much negativity on the team. And the reason you've got to keep it 3-to-1 is because negative is more powerful than positive. Have you noticed that? I mean, if someone says something negative to you, they can't just balance that out by turning around and saying, oh, you look so nice today, right? You're going to remember the negative thing that was said. And so it takes about 3 positives, and we have to really notice this. In work teams, that means noticing when people do things well. That means thanking people for going the extra mile. That means sometimes just having that small talk. All those things are really important because positive emotion builds up like a cushion. And when we face something negative and we've had a lot of positive, we're like falling onto a mattress, right? But when we've had very little positive and there is a stumble and a fall, it's like falling onto concrete, and it's less likely that the relationship will be resilient. But this ratio applies to us personally as well. How much positive do you have in your life? And when you're going through a lot of negative, you've got to be more intentional about finding the happy people, finding the positive people to be around, because it's contagious. Positivity literally is contagious. There's a longitudinal Harvard study that's gone on for about 70 years now. And one of the things that they found is that within networks, like within social networks, just having one happy person in your social network increases your chances of being happy by 15%. And to put that in perspective, they found that if they just gave you another $10,000 a year, that would increase your happiness by about 8%. So just having happy people around you makes you happier, but it also opens up communication, which is absolutely essential. So about 3-to-1 in all of your relationships, but if you're married, the ratio is a little higher. It's 5-to-1. Some of y'all look like, no, Valorie, no, right? So 5-to-1, that's really, John Gottman, who's out in Washington State, has something called the Love Lab. He's done this research for years, and amazingly, one of the things he found in terms of resilience with couples is that they will basically video record a couple having a conversation about a difficult topic, something they don't typically agree on, for 15 minutes. So just imagine if you're married, imagine you and your spouse or you and your significant other, you're having a conversation about something difficult, it's being recorded, and what they do is they go back later and they code your body language, your words, your tone for positive and negative interactions, okay? And then they decide what your ratio is. Does this sound fun or what? Yeah. And so here's what they found. They keep following the couples over years and years. And they found that the couples whose ratio was lower than 5-to-1 in that 15-minute conversation have a 91% chance of divorce within 10 years, simply based on how they interacted in a 15-minute conversation. this is really huge. Some of you are like, okay, I need to call my spouse. Thank you for taking out the trash. You looked great today, right? It's those simple things. It's the gratitude, it's empathy, it's acknowledging what others are going through. We have to do this in all of our relationships. It's really, really critical. So maintaining that ratio of positive to negative emotions and making the decision. I can't go it alone. If I'm having a difficult time, whether on a project or something even more serious personally, who could I reach out to for help? Sometimes we just need someone to have a conversation with, a sounding board, someone to commiserate, someone who's already been there and done that, that can kind of share from that perspective, that can see from our perspective. This is a resilient strategy. And when we have self-compassion, we acknowledge, yeah, what I'm going through right now this is kind of hard, or I've never dealt with this before, right? And so I feel uncomfortable. Just naming your emotions can be powerful. Being able to say, I think I'm feeling some anxiety right now. That alone lets you know that you need to do something to deal with it. So being really honest with yourself and being willing to reach out can be extremely powerful. The second P in purpose is put things into perspective. This is among my favorites, put things into perspective. So I said in the beginning, resilience is largely about how you think, right? In the face of difficulties, and sometimes even in the face of good things, right? We need resilience when good things happen, right? You might have just had a baby. That requires some resilience, right? Because there's a lot of change with that. You might have gotten a promotion, right? And that requires resilience because there's a new level of expectation, new things you're needing to learn, people you're having to lead. So keep in mind that when we're talking about this, sometimes it's not just the negative things that happen, but the positive ones that create the need to be resilient. But putting things into perspective is when we are faced, especially right in the moment, with something that stresses us out. And has anyone ever had something happen, you find some information out and you go from like 0 to everybody's about to die in like 10 seconds? And so, it could be as simple as, your sister was meeting you at Starbucks and she's 10 minutes late, and now your thoughts are spiraling out of control about what has happened to her, right? She's not answering herself, I don't know what's going on. So a lot of times we will do something called catastrophizing. Any of you ever heard of catastrophizing? You can probably imagine what catastrophizing is, okay? Let me give you an example, okay? You are sitting at your desk and an email comes in, and all the email says is, it's from your boss, okay? It's from your boss, and all it says is, meet me in my office in 10 minutes. Okay, if you're a catastrophizer, you're not just thinking worst case scenario, you're thinking worst case irrational scenario of what's about to happen. There's a whole movie playing out in your head, and it is going down, okay? All right, so I want y'all to help me out. Meet me in my office in 10 minutes. It's from your boss. What's about to happen? You all basically say that in unison. You're getting fired. Okay, now, if you're a catastrophizer, it doesn't stop with, I'm fired, okay? You're thinking about everything that's going to happen after you get fired. What are all the consequences? So play along with me here. You're getting fired, and then what happens? They walk you out the door. It's like a march of shame down the hallway to the, okay, I gotcha. All right, they march you out the door, and then what happens? You can't pay your bills. All right, you can't pay your bills, and then what happens? You lose your house, and you get divorced. Your spouse leaves you, okay? All right, so I'm gonna get this straight. You're getting fired. There's a walk of shame. You can't pay your bills. You lose your house. You lose your spouse. Anything else? That's pretty bad, I would say, okay? All right, so all that happened is you got an email from your boss that said, meet me in my office in 10 minutes. You have gone from, happily sitting there doing your work to, I've lost my job, I've lost my house, I lost my spouse, okay? All right, so if you ever find yourself doing this, as we do this with all sorts of things, you might have a presentation coming up and you've had all sorts of crazy thoughts going on about how it's going to go. We do this and it really is counterproductive, right? It wastes a lot of energy. If you find yourself doing this, then I want you to kind of play a game. Number one, acknowledge what your thoughts are. Because usually when we have these wild thoughts, we never say them out loud. You notice how you laughed about what your thoughts were? We typically keep them to ourselves, and then we try to look normal, right? You Your coworkers are looking at you. Is something wrong? No, everything's fine. You're thinking, like, he's going to leave me. I'm going to move my house. I got to go have this meeting. Right? You're having all these crazy thoughts. So I want you to, first of all, acknowledge what you're saying because you're probably going to get a bit of a chuckle out of it. Then secondly, I want you to do just the opposite. I want you to think of the best case, equally irrational scenario of what is about to happen, okay? All right? So you get the email that says, meet me in my office in 10 minutes. Something wildly but irrationally good is about to happen. What is it? How much is the raise? Did you say $100,000 raise? That sounds wild and irrational. Okay, all right. So let's say you're not just getting a promotion, you're getting like a 3-level promotion. Okay, your boss brings you in and she's like, you know, we just realized that we have so undervalued you for so long. I mean, we should have promoted you at several points in the past, and I think what we need to do is make up for that. So we're going to promote you over me. Okay? And we just want to give you an extra $100,000. Is that enough? Is that good? Right? Okay. Are y'all feeling much better about this situation? Okay. All right. So when we do that, we jolt ourselves out of the negative to something that's ridiculously positive, and then we can ask the most important question, which is, what's the most likely thing that's about to happen? Meet me in my office in 10 minutes. What does your boss want? What'd you say? There's more work. Anything else it could be? What should we order for lunch, right? That's probably what it is. She's sitting in there with menus like, should we do Panera today? Or, right, and just wants your opinion, okay? And so when we notice our thoughts, that's really what we're doing, is we're building self-awareness. And so really important, stop catastrophizing. Do the irrational worst case, acknowledge when you're doing this. Notice when other people in your life are doing this as well. And you can do that by saying, what's the movie playing out in your head? What are you saying to yourself right now, right? Go to the irrational best case and then go to your most likely. Here's what is happening, and this is at the core of resilience. One of the things that we do at the CAP Institute is resilience training. So I had, years ago, done resilience training for the military as part of a team that the University of Pennsylvania put together to help the military create their comprehensive soldier fitness program, which is so important because after being in 2 wars and soldiers being deployed not just 3 or 4 times, but sometimes 5, 6 times or more, you know, that just takes such a toll not only on them, but on their families, right? And what I began to realize as I do talks like this is that so many corporations are dealing with so much change that this idea of resilience training is relevant in the corporate marketplace as well. So at the core of resilience training that we do when we go into companies is we teach this idea of self-awareness. And it really starts with understanding what's your trigger? What is the thing that stresses you? Think about what you're dealing with. And I know many of you are dealing with a lot of different changes in your industry, in the organization, different ways of doing things, sometimes not knowing what's going to change, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, right? That can be the trigger. We tend to believe we go from our trigger to our reactions. So whatever the stressor is, I had a reaction to it. But the truth of the matter is, in between our trigger and our reaction is a thought. And it is our thoughts that produce our reactions. Our reactions are what we feel, what we say, and what we do. Right? Always preceded by a thought. And the thought can be so quick that we don't notice it. So the key to being resilient is slowing down enough, just taking a pause to say, what am I thinking? What am I saying to myself? Because you literally can change your thoughts, and by changing your thoughts, you change your reactions. What you feel, what you say, and what you do. This doesn't happen overnight, but it happens with practice, right? And so after I had started doing the resilience training for the military, I had something happen in my life that was, to that point, and really probably in my whole life, the thing that required the most courage of me. I got married in 2003, and in 2009, I found myself going through a divorce. And most people never get married expecting to go through a divorce. And there was a moment I had where it just hit me, like I realized, no, this is really happening. Your life is really about to change. And in that moment, I was overwhelmed. And I was standing in the kitchen, I was by myself. I started crying, but my crying turned to wailing, which I had heard that people wail, but I thought maybe it was an exaggeration until I found myself doing it. And it just became loud and uncontrollable, and I started to think maybe I'm going crazy, right? Because when you lose control of your emotions enough and it's totally unfamiliar to you, you can scare yourself. Anyone here ever scared yourself with your reactions? And so I was having all sorts of thoughts, like my life is over, I don't know what I'm gonna do. The whole my life is over was a bit much because I was only 36 at the time, but I really believed it was over. And so in that moment, while I'm crying and then wailing, it was so bad that I thought to myself, I literally had this thought, I can't waste this kind of a cry on just myself. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, if you cry bad enough, you want to be able to tell somebody later how bad it was, but I thought nobody's going to really get this, so I need to call somebody so somebody can witness how bad things really are. And so I was like, who do I call? I decided to call my mother, okay? And so I called my mother. She knew what I was going through, but she had never heard me quite like this. And so she picks up the phone. I can't even really get the words out very well. I'm sputtering nonsense. My life is over. I don't know what I'm going to do. I think I'm losing my mind. I think I'm going crazy. And here's the thing. If you want somebody to feel sorry for you, don't call a resilient person. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, don't call the person up that's been through stuff, because they're just not going to get into the pity party with you. And so I'm saying all this stuff, and my mother heard me. My mother is a very spiritual woman. So when she heard me say, I think I'm losing my mind, I think I'm going crazy, like, she stopped me. And she started quoting scriptures to me. And at that point, I knew I had called the wrong person. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so the gist of what my mother said was that my words were powerful. And I know you are feeling overwhelmed right now, and I know you feel like life is over, but it's not. You're not the first person to go through this, and you will make it through this. But then she said to me, now listen, you sound like you look pretty ugly right now. And I did. She was telling the truth. However, I didn't want to hear that right there. She said, I want you to go to the bathroom, wash your face. It's a nice day outside. She said, take a walk for a few minutes and call me when you get back. And I did that. She did it because sometimes when we are spiraling downward, we need a jolt that stops us. I needed to catch my breath. And I came back home and I called her back, and we had a really good conversation. But I got to tell you, it's not that I never cried again. But I never cried again from that woe is me place. I decided in that moment that I would walk through that fire, but it would not consume me. And my mantra became, I will be better and not bitter. I just kept saying that over and over again to myself. There's something that psychology researchers call post-traumatic growth syndrome. We've all heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. But one of the things they have found is that for those who go through very challenging, difficult situations, traumas, that there's a larger percentage that find themselves expanded by the experience. That on the other side of it, they will say, I'm a better human being. Now, I would not wish divorce on anyone, but I can tell you right now, I am a more compassionate person than I was. I'm a more intentional person than I was. I don't begrudge it. I was at that point where I thought, oh my gosh, I might never have kids. I wonder if I'll ever get married again. And you know what? It all worked itself out beautifully. And I wouldn't be where I am today if I had not gone through what I went through in those 6 years. It's hard to see it in the moment. And whether you're dealing with those changes professionally or personally, being able to notice what you say to yourself in the heat of the moment is so important. Because I made a decision to change my thoughts from life is over, I don't know what I'm going to do, to I'll be better, but not bitter. I'm determined this is not going to ruin me. I'm not going to be angry and bitter out of this. I'll forgive. I'll move on. I've got a lot of life ahead of me. These are choices and these are thoughts that we don't automatically have. They are thoughts we have to make a decision to have. You might even post them around. If you find yourself at work having anxiety about certain things, decide what you want to think and keep yourself reminded of it. Put it on your screensaver if you need to. Send yourself emails. I don't care how you do it. But over time, you start to think differently because you're doing it intentionally. So you have your trigger, but you don't go from the trigger to the reaction. You actually go from your trigger to your thought to your reaction. And when you change your thought, you change your reaction to it. So I've just basically mentioned this, but our thoughts all lead to different types of reactions. So typically if we're having anxiety and fear, the thought is danger, right? it's something bad is about to happen, right? Sometimes it's loss. And when you're dealing with change within an organization, sometimes you're dealing with the loss of the way things used to be that you really liked. And so you have to process that because that can create sadness, that can create withdrawal. So noticing it and acknowledging it, sometimes just kind of going, whew, okay, I'm dealing with loss here. Hadn't thought of it as loss. Sometimes we deal with the loss of something we thought we were going to have, and that's really intangible, and we don't understand why we're feeling the way we're feeling. Being able to simply acknowledge the thoughts, but notice the reactions that they create. All right, let's do these last few. Operate with optimism. I kind of told you that a little bit, but here's the thing. Optimism actually predicts success, but this is, when I say most of the time, this is realistic optimism, okay? This isn't simply, I can do anything, right? Because the truth is, we can't do anything. I know your parents told you this, I know your teachers told you this, but the things you were meant to do that fall within your purpose, those are the things you can do. But I gotta tell you, if I asked somebody to give me a ride home to Atlanta this afternoon, and I said, listen, I bet we can do it on 1 tank of gas, let's just think positively, right? It's not going to work, right? At some point, we're going to run out of gas trying to get from Minneapolis to Atlanta. So when there is risk, it is so important for us to have that dose of pessimism that helps us to see that there are some things that could go wrong if I don't address them. But we need optimism to say, and I can find a way around those obstacles. I can find the people, the resources, the strength, whatever it is. So when we talk about optimism, the kind of optimism I'm talking about is noticing what could go wrong, noticing the challenges in front of you and acknowledging them, and then saying, okay, what do we need to do to work around them? As leaders, this is so important. Optimism is one of the predictors of success among leaders, right? You don't want a pessimistic leader. Have you ever had a pessimistic boss? You know, they can look at the team and be like, you know, you're all right. We got this big project. Give it your best shot. I'm praying for the best, right? So, you know, that doesn't inspire, right? Leaders have to inspire, which means they have to help people see the vision and have the optimism to believe you can get there. And sometimes you might have a little concern. You might not be totally sure, but as a leader, you want to make sure they believe it's possible because that's when people rise to the occasion, okay? So we know that optimism is so powerful in part because the positive emotion from optimism actually builds up our health. When you have a lot of positive emotion, you're less likely to get sick. I love that one. Optimists actually on average live longer, up to 9 years longer than pessimists. Some of you are like, oh my goodness, depending on what your job is, you might have been trained to be more pessimistic, right? So if you're in marketing, you're in sales, optimism is absolutely essential. If you're a trainer, optimism is essential. But if you're in accounting, for example, if you're a surgeon, you know, we want the person that can be pessimistic. I don't want the optimistic surgeon doing my surgery. You understand what I'm saying? Oh, you know what? I don't think we need to do that. I think this will be fine. Just tie him up. We're good, right? We want the surgeon that sees everything that might go wrong, accounts for it, right? But when it comes to being able to lead people and set goals, you've got to put that optimistic hat on, all right? So next is serve. This is the simplest because purpose is always about serving. But in order to be resilient, always being able to ask, not simply what can I get, which is typically how we show up in the world, what can I get out of this, but what can I give? How am I meant to serve in this situation? Here's what I have found. When we focus on service, we find the greater purpose in what we're doing. That means that when we're needing to persevere in difficult times, we've found our purpose in persevering. Purpose fuels perseverance. It makes us more resilient. When we can't find a purpose in what we're doing, when we don't understand why we have to get through this challenge, it makes it much more difficult to get through the challenge. So being able to be really clear about purpose is absolutely essential. And just ask yourself that question. If you don't understand the answer, sometimes you got to step back and go, what am I supposed to learn out of this? What's the message in this for me? And oftentimes that shifts your perspective enough to give you the motivation to keep moving forward. This is, I think, so, so powerful. I used to get nervous before I would speak. And what I realized is my nervousness was about what the audience would think, which meant I was thinking about myself. I wasn't thinking about how I was showing up to serve. I was thinking about what response I might get or what is it about me, right? And when I shifted, and every single time I speak, I believe in my heart that I cross paths with you today for a reason. If there was one thing I said that helps you to see things differently, helps you to come up with a new solution, helped to inspire you, that I know that I showed up for a purpose. And I don't get nervous about serving. I'm here to serve you, right? So if I mess up a little bit, that's okay, because it wasn't really about that. It was about the fact that I showed up to serve. What if you showed up in your job that way, in your family that way, in your community activities that way? Not what can I get, but what can I give? And then here's the last thing. I started out asking you, what was the best thing that happened? In other words, what are you most grateful for? And I did that because we know that gratitude produces positive emotion. We need to ask ourselves more often, on a daily basis, what brings me joy? And sometimes it's just the little things, but being intentional about doing them. My family and I moved about 6.5 months ago now. We bought a farm. We're not farmers, but we wanted to have some land, and we thought this would be a really wonderful way for our kids to grow up. And so one of the things we had not anticipated was the sunsets. The sunsets where we live are just beautiful. And so we've created this kind of new ritual every night after dinner. We just go sit on the porch and look at the sunset. Now, I didn't think the kids would be all that interested in that, but, I said, this is what I'm doing, and I just kind of look, and we enjoy it. After a few weeks, here's what started to happen. One night, I looked out the window, and Addie, who's 11, was just standing on the front porch, barefoot, staring at the sunset. We came outside, she didn't even notice, because she was so engrossed with just looking at the sun until it went down. The very next day, I was too busy to remember to go outside and look at the sunset. You know that time between 7 and 9 in the evenings if you have kids, and you're trying to get everything done and get everybody to bed. And so I'm doing dishes and so forth, and my son, who's 4, came into the kitchen, and I'm like so busy, right? I've got the dishes, I'm getting to the sink, and he says to me, Mommy, you have to stop. It's time to watch the sunset. And he wasn't like really asking, he was telling. He grabbed my hand and he starts leading me to the front door. And I thought to myself, Alex gets it, right? It's those simple moments that can give us so much joy. And yeah, the dishes will get done. But when we savor, savoring is a happiness trigger. When we just notice what's going on in the moment, it calms us. It brings us more positive emotion. So as I close today, I'm going to share with you a few happiness triggers that I think you will very much enjoy. So I've already mentioned gratitude and savoring, but I'm just going to mention 2 or 3 more so you have some concrete things to move forward with. We tend to think that success produces happiness, right? So we go after success looking for happiness. We think we're being resilient so we can get the success because that's going to make us happy. Happiness is pretty much the only thing in life we pursue for its own sake, right? But the truth of the matter is research shows it's the opposite. That positive emotion, happiness, actually causes success. And it's not just a correlation. Those who are happier are actually more likely to get promoted. They are more likely to get raises. They actually live longer. There's all of these wonderful benefits that come from positive emotion and happiness. So gratitude is one of the ways you can do it. Before you go to bed, ask yourself, what's the best thing that happened? Maybe you do it over dinner. I know many of you ask your kids, what happened at school today? They always reply, Nothing ever happens, right? I don't know why you send them there. Quit asking them. Just ask them, what's the best thing that happened, right? Help them to have gratitude, anticipation. When you get up in the morning, ask yourself, what am I looking forward to today? And stop talking about what you have to do. And replace the phrase have to with get to. I get to go to work today. I don't have to go. I mean, there'll be some pretty bad consequences if I don't go, but I don't have to go. I get to go. There are a lot of people that would love to have your job and get to go to work. You don't have to drive your kids around. You get to, right? There's a point when you probably wanted them and you were all excited, and now you're like, some of you are like, yeah, probably, Valerie. Some of you are like, yeah, and then I got used to it, and now I kind of complain. Notice the things that you get to do. Anticipation actually produces positive emotion. You're having a vacation, you can get as much positive emotion out of planning it as you get from the actual vacation itself. So 2 others, play. Now, research shows that women connect face to face, right? Talking, connection is a happiness trigger. Men tend to bond side by side through play, right? And we see this with little boys and grown men, right? Little boys wrestling or playing video games, grown men playing basketball or golf or whatever it is. Men tend to bond side by side, but there's a real advantage to play that as women we can tap into, which is this. When we play, we can't multitask. So it gives our minds a break. I want you to identify something that you do just purely for the joy of it, not because you have to perform well, but simply because you like it. Are y'all with me on this? Mine is tennis. I'm terrible. I only play with bad tennis players, right? But I think you can choose your sport by the outfit, and I think the outfits are cute, okay? So that's what I play. I don't need to be good at it. There are a lot of things in life you need to be good at. You need to have something you don't need to be good at, but it brings you joy anyway. Play can help you do that. But here's the last one. This is my absolute favorite. It's smiling. It's the easiest one. So you know you smile because you're happy. Some of you look pretty happy right now. But here's the thing. Did you know that smiling itself, like when you have a full-on, like your cheeks are puffed up, I can see your teeth, right? Your eyes might even crinkle. That's called a Duchenne smile, after the French physician who discovered it, Dr. Duchenne. And what he discovered is that the muscles that contract when you smile, will y'all smile at me? Can I see a Duchenne smile? Oh, no. There you go. Okay, all right. I just want to see the teeth. Okay, keep smiling, okay? Now, I want you to keep smiling and then think about a coworker that gets on your nerves while you're smiling, okay? So here's the thing. When you smile like this, it triggers the release of serotonin and endorphins to the brain. You actually feel just a little bit happier, which makes it harder for you to think about the coworker that gets on your nerves, right? Okay, so here's the interesting thing. Even if you don't feel like smiling, the research shows that if you just put a pencil between your teeth, you can still release serotonin and endorphins to the brain, okay? And if you don't have a pencil, what they say you should do is just make a hard E sound, okay? You can do it with me. E. Okay, some of you are going to go home from the conference. Everything's going to be a mess when you get home, like, you know, the laundry's piled up, and you're just going to walk through the house, just go, E, right? You'll be sitting in the meeting with the coworker that gets on your nerves, E. Why don't you take that pencil out of your mouth, Deborah, right? And so it's so important for us to notice those simple things, the happiness triggers that boost our positive emotion, because positive emotion expands our ability to deal with adversity and with stress. Asking what brings you joy is actually a resilience strategy. At the end of the day, success is a harmony of purpose, knowing what you're here for, resilience, being able to bounce back over and over, and joy. Success has to produce joy. We have to find ourselves every single day finding something good to be grateful for and happy for. So picture your possibilities, have a clear vision, use your failures and your mistakes as a learning tool. Reach out, don't be afraid to ask for help and to collaborate. Put things into perspective. If you've been catastrophizing, notice what you're doing in the heat of the moment. Shift from the worst case irrational to the best case irrational, and then say, what's the most likely thing to happen? Operate with optimism. Notice the things that might go wrong, but believe in your ability to work around whatever the obstacles are. Serve, remember to ask, not simply what can I get, but what can I give? What am I here to do for others? And then lastly, simply enjoy your journey. It has been such an awesome honor to talk to you all this morning. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Valorie. Let's please welcome to the stage Julie Prepper.
Thank you, Valorie. What a powerful way to end this conference. You know, when you were growing up and you got that list from your mother to never talk to strangers, never play in the middle of the road, a little ways down that list, I'm pretty confident, was never follow Valorie Burton to the stage. But here I am, and now wow, I guess is the word I have. We've had a couple days of just incredible, knowledgeable speakers. We started, and I think my challenge was find something that you can take away. And I think my challenge is there should have been something from everybody you heard from that you can take back and hopefully incorporate immediately into your lives, personal, professional, to make you more impactful in whatever areas you're leading. But I also want to remind you that to lead implies being followed. And I want you to reflect on what you've learned this week and how you can go back and pass that on to those that are following you, be it your team, people you're mentoring. PWH creates leaders, and we encourage you to leave this meeting and embrace that mission with us. Before we wrap up, I do want to take a minute and thank the fabulous logistics team that has just made everything run so smoothly this week. I also want to just take another moment to thank again our summit sponsors and our corporate partners for your support and making the event possible. And I just wish everybody the best, best in incorporating these skills that you've learned this week and the insights into your life. And we look forward to seeing you at the next PWH Leadership Summit. Safe travels.
We will shine.